Hundreds and thousands of protesters in Egypt are demanding change. King Abdullah II of Jordan has fired preemptive political strikes. The president of Tunisia has been ousted, and journalists are being silenced. That and more is grist for Jonathan Manthorpe. He is an international affairs reporter, a seasoned foreign correspondent who writes a column for the Vancouver Sun newspaper, and he has a blog called Dispatches. It is my pleasure to welcome Jonathan Manthorpe back to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Morning, Fanny.
Well, busy week, busy month for you.
Yes. It's been morning, noon, and night, I'm afraid. But there we are. That's.
So, as you watch the tumult grow in Egypt, what do you make of it?
Well, this has been coming for a long time, Fanny. There's been concern in Egypt about what happens come the next elections due August, September. Mubarak, who's been in power for 30 years, he's 82 years old, he's reputedly not very well. It was pretty certain he wasn't going to run again anyway. Now these riots, these demonstrations sparked by, we think, by what happened in Tunisia a few weeks ago, this has really sort of brought into focus something that was coming to a head anyway.
Okay. So link me to Tunisia. What happened in Tunisia and why it's linked to what's going on in Egypt?
Well, Tunisia, there were riots started in December to try and oust President Ben Ali, who's been there for a long time, thoroughly corrupt, unpleasant, nasty man. He was forced at the beginning of January, early in January, to leave after essentially the army said, we no longer support you, we're not going to fire on the demonstrators, you're on your own. So he loaded up a plane with all the loot and flew to Saudi Arabia. A different situation from Egypt, but the common thread was that a lot of young people in Tunisia were using new social media to really sort of rally people in the streets, and that spread into Egypt, and so we've had this sort of series 2 weeks now of demonstrations in Liberation Square in the center of Cairo and in Alexandria and other cities as well.
As you know, Mubarak said yesterday and probably again today that he fears if he does resign immediately, there will be more chaos.
Well, he's an important figure and has been a very important figure in the Middle East for over 30 years. Egypt has 80 million people. It's the largest Arab country in the Middle East, and Mubarak has been hugely influential not only in Arab politics, but also in the whole relationship with Israel, which means also in the relationship with the United States. Egypt recognized Israel about 35 years ago. It has a peace treaty with Israel. That also applies to Jordan. But Mubarak and his officials have been very, very important in dealing with the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. And because of the importance of this position, the US has been subsidizing the Mubarak government to the tune of about $2 billion a year for 30 years or so. A lot of that money, of course, goes for arms and for equipment for the military to keep Mubarak in power. But he's been seen and still is seen as a very, very important interlocutor in the Middle East.
So what is behind the urgency to get him to leave now, today? Why?
Exactly, and I'm not quite sure I understand that, and I'm a bit surprised that the President Obama in the US seemed to have adopted that, because for years we've heard that if Mubarak is ousted, then we're likely to get a much worse regime in Egypt, that we're likely to get something led by the Muslim Brotherhood, this radical Islamic group, which undoubtedly has a large following in Egypt, but we really don't know how large a following, whether it would actually be able to form a government.
So how radical is the Muslim Brotherhood?
That's a very good question, and you'll hear all sorts of replies on that. I don't think it is as radical as it is sometimes painted. I think it's in the interests of the Mubarak regime to paint it as something akin to Al-Qaeda, and there's no doubt that it has had links to Al-Qaeda, and in many ways was the ideological base for Al-Qaeda. But the Muslim Brotherhood has been at some care for the last few years to try and remove itself from its really hardline radical image and to get rid of any violent elements within its membership.
Okay, Islamic scholar Tariq Ramadan, who teaches at Oxford, was here yesterday. His grandfather started the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. He suggested to me that it is about democracy and freedom. Or part of the movement is about democracy and freedom.
It's democracy and freedom under a theological umbrella. And how far you can have democracy and freedom in a theocratic state, I really don't know. I don't know many fully democratic, theocratic states. I mean, the main one we have before us is Iran, and that clearly is very limited, isn't it?
Sure. And the big question is, of course, what kind of democracy? How do you define democracy? Is it how the West looks at democracy? And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton yesterday certainly was pushing for a peaceful resolution, but not telling them how.
Well, I think that this is where perhaps Obama has sort of strayed over the line in insisting that he wants Mubarak to go now. That clearly is an interference in Egypt's affairs, and it's something which will actually, and clearly is, making Mubarak resist very strongly. And not only Mubarak, but some of his key members, especially Vice President Omar Suleiman, who is, I think, increasingly important figure in this.
Would he be the next in charge? I know the son is not favored, and he has said that won't happen.
No.
Jamal.
No, I think if Mubarak does go before the elections, which are due, as I say, August, September, then it will be Suleiman who will be the interim president. And he may even be, of course, the candidate for the National Democratic Party, a not very well named party, in September.
The NDP.
The NDP.
The National Democratic Party. But one of the startling things for us is to watch the violation of international norms when they're pulling journalists off the street or taking cameras or suggesting you aren't allowed to take pictures. And I'm sure the networks are all in a fluff because they're doing reports, which you've done so many times, from a hotel room. What do you think is going on there?
Oh, I think that the Mubarak regime it interprets very clearly that a lot of its problems with particularly its international partners stems from what they're seeing on their network televisions back home. And the Mubarak is seeing that this sort of instant news and 24-hour news from Liberation Square is making it, is increasing the pressure on him from his traditional allies like the US and the Europeans. And so I'm sure that there is an effort to shut that down and to sort of release some of this pressure. That said, I have to say, some of the reports I've seen, heard, and read, I would say, verge on cheerleading from for the demonstrators. No, for the demonstrators, for the pro-democracy people in the square. We've got two major groups in the square there. We've got pro-democracy, middle-class, non-religious people, and we've got the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
So there's really two distinct elements there.
All against Mubarak?
All against Mubarak,
Okay. Any links between the Muslim Brotherhood and the kind of middle-class Egyptian with the suitcase?
Well, not quite a part. Well, getting rid of Mubarak, really, that's the major link. But I mean, once that's removed, then they have very little in common.
Well, today it seems to have simmered down, and I haven't been able to watch too much, but they're calling it the day of departure.
Yeah, well, and of course, if he does not go today, which I think, given the time difference when we're talking, probably won't happen, that, of course, will dent their credibility a bit. You know, you have to remember, I think, that even though we're seeing a lot of people in the square there, in terms of the Egyptian population and the huge variety and disparity of these people, we're not hearing the voice of Egypt in that square. Mubarak he may be unpopular and is clearly unpopular amongst urban middle class and amongst Puritan religious people. But out in the countryside, he remains very popular. He remains a strong father figure, and he will feel no pressure from outside that square in Cairo to go quickly.
Okay, let's take a break. Jonathan Manthorpe, our guest, he's an international affairs columnist, an expert on pretty much what's going on in the world. We'll come back.